Why China would smoke the USA if World War III started today? To put it in less alarmist terms, why China would win if World War III started today and if the conditions don't change. The USA and China have a lot of differences. They have political, cultural, and civilizational differences. But one thing that they have in common is that at the height of their power, they were and are respectively titanic industrial powerhouses. Coming out of World War II, the USA had an industrial base that was the envy of the entire planet. During World War II, the only region of the world that could compete with the USA in industrial might, that is, Europe, saw its factories burned to the ground. So American factories were unchallenged in industrial output. Japan at the time was a growing industrial power, which was led by the Zaibatsu, which were major industrial conglomerates. But after World War II, Japan saw its industrial base in ashes, leaving the USA as the strongest nation in terms of industry. This seems to show that World War II was an industrial war, and the result was an unmatched industrial power, the USA. No one was more aware of this fact than the Soviets. After World War II and in the Cold War, the Soviets went all in, investing heavily in industrial capacity. From the space race to the arms race, the factories of the Soviet Union and those of the USA were the real front line of the Cold War. After the fall of the Soviet Union, the USA and Europe emerged as great industrial powers. Japan was also in that group, but the deals and agreements made after World War II seem to not have allowed Europe and Japan to focus their industrial might in a military direction. This demonstrates that the basis of hard military power is industrial power. And in my mind, I think that Germany would be the heart of Europe in terms of culture and industrial output. But that's just an opinion. The factories that a nation owns determine their level of industrial power. Every Bradley tank, every Tomahawk missile, every AK-47 and every Gripen fighter, which I absolutely loved seeing in the skies when I was growing up. Gripens are awesome in my opinion. All these weapons were once drawings on a factory floor. So factories are the basis of industrial power, and industrial power is the basis of hard military power in the modern world. And at least for the last 2 decades, people have been calling China the factory of the world. Made in China has become a feature of our lives. China has become a great nation of industrialists. China has mastered the factory because of initially their low labor costs and now increasingly their level of skill and strong supply chain. The factories of the world have been moving to China. Even Swiss watches now have parts made in China. The size of the Chinese economy gives it enormous negotiating power. So for these reasons, along with a desire to become more competitive, some of the greatest traditional manufacturers of the world have also become made in China. So China has become an industrial power, which by our reasoning also allows it to become a military power, or it at least has the potential to go in that direction very rapidly. In recent years, we have seen improvements in the quality of cars being produced by China. Mass production of cars is one of the most advanced stages of industrialization. Having designed automotive factories myself, I can tell you that the supply chains are very complex, and each country prefers to use components from their own country. So Americans prefer to use American electronics, robots, and even down to small valves. That is to say that car factories show varied and complex industrial outputs, and China is at that level now. Keep in mind that a lot of these automotive companies led production during World War II, both in Germany and in the USA. So these factories can also be retooled to produce arms if needed. Personally, I believe that what China has accomplished is truly amazing. To upskill and move millions out of poverty is a great feat, and the speed at which they did this was incredible. I also think that we need to see a democracy do the same, or else government for the people and of the people will vanish from the face of the earth, as a great man once said. Another great man also said, "We don't care whether the cat is black or white as long as it can catch mice." And the rest of the world doesn't care if the government is democratic or not. They're just interested in what works. And many countries will cease to believe in democracy if an example doesn't emerge. And I think that the USA was the example for democracies and showed that democracy equals development. But that is now in question all over the world. If we look at the level of organization in China and the ability to have a unified purpose, well, the fact that they were able to rapidly industrialize hints at their level of organization. Furthermore, the government seems to be able to influence the direction of the economy, whilst also allowing for factory owners to produce what they want. For instance, China wanted to improve the reputation of the quality of made in China. They managed to do so for the most part. You also don't see as much violence and protest in mainland China as you do in the West. The attempted assassination of an American president and the assassination of a prominent US political pundit point to deep political divisions and a lack of social cohesion in the USA. Are the Americans still able to show unity of purpose like they did under Roosevelt in World War II? That is the question, and that is in question. Also, on a more optical level, comparing the Chinese military parade and the American parade hinted to a vast difference in societal organization and cohesion. These parades mean very little, but the symbolism was clear for all to see. Then there's the issue of technological advantage. We haven't seen major technological advances in recent years, so the gap in technology between America and China is narrowing. Some would say it has already narrowed. AI seems to be the next frontier in technology, but the Chinese quickly showed a grasp of that technology too with DeepSeek. Although it is said that China doesn't have access to the best semiconductors, I don't think that the gap has narrowed because there's a lot of high-tech industries that China hasn't yet fully dominated. But I believe that the gap has narrowed enough to erode any major advantages that the US may have. It's like when your younger brother grows up, at some point you realize that you cannot physically dominate him with ease anymore. And now there would be a cost, especially if you lose. Cultures like the Indian or Chinese cultures are old ancient cultures, and these old cultures tend to value owning gold, be it in the form of personal jewelry or in the vaults of the state. The USA is one of the greatest markets in terms of financial assets like stocks and bonds. These are the guys who invented and perfected the junk bond. That is to say, they are more interested in more abstract forms of money than hard, solid gold. If we know anything from history, it's that gold was always important in war. Maybe fiat will prove to be better for war, but only time will tell. But for now, history tells us that gold is king. And we know that after World War II, America ended up with a lot of the gold from other countries. So at the height of America's power, they had a lot of gold. And now the question is, would abstract money outweigh hard, solid gold? Finally, military equipment requires fuel, mostly fossil fuels. The factories that are the source of industrial power also require energy to run, and China has the largest country on earth with massive amounts of natural resources right next door. They have Russia, which is a major oil producer. This access to oil, together with the Chinese industrial base, makes for a serious rival. Not to mention that this rival has a population of billions. So in my view, if World War III broke out today, China would smoke America. That is to say, China would win against the USA. From the strong industrial base, to national unity of purpose, to abundant energy access, a large population, and even gold reserves that are envious to any sane state. These are the pillars upon which the Allies won World War II. And a lot of those cards are increasingly in the hands of China. When the pillars of your power start showing cracks and a rival is erecting identical pillars that are brand new and fresher, they become a rival with the potential to defeat you. You could also argue that an alliance with Russia was also one of the pillars that allowed the Allies to win World War II, but that's a point that would be too hard to get anybody to accept, so I'll leave that out for now. China has really positioned itself masterfully. They have balanced out all of the strengths of the USA without even making a noise. Personally, as someone who lives in a country and a city that was on the side of the British and by extension the Allies in the World Wars, as someone who walks past the World War memorials, as someone who lives in a city and a country that was built by people who bled in those wars, I would not want to see a conflict between these two giants, especially since China now gives inspiration to the developing world that it's possible to lift millions of people out of poverty. And the Americans have always played that role in the past. So a war between these two symbols of the human race would be tragic. But if things did get kinetic, if World War III becomes a hot war, I think that the superior population of China, together with its industrial base, would overpower the USA today. And that's if the conditions don't change. The alliance between Russia and China would also make them an immovable force, because Russia could provide the lifeblood of any industrial power. And when it comes to the nuclear question, the alliance with Russia and North Korea, together with China's old arsenal, make that option unthinkable. I think that people like President Richard Nixon of America understood that, but the players today don't seem to take that into account, or they don't show that they take that into account. Maybe they secretly do. I hope they secretly do. The main strength of the USA would be their experience in fighting recent wars. Their troops are experienced and well trained, but that could also be a weakness because everyone has had a chance to study how they fight. And that experience can also be seen as spent political capital. This may create a strong rejection of another war in the American public. Again, a strength turned into a weakness. The other strength of the US would have to be their allies, but the political, economic, and social state of most of the traditional allies of the USA is similar to the condition of the USA, that is, deindustrialization and high debt. So I pray that such a war would never happen, and if China takes the art of war as seriously as the rest of the world does, then it won't happen. And if they follow Sun Tzu's advice of waiting by the river until your enemies float by, and I don't know enough about Chinese culture to know if they take the art of war seriously, but if it did happen today, I think China would win based on how they've positioned their pieces on the chessboard. But you can never write off the USA. They are creative and energetic. The only two questions they have to answer is, can they find unity of purpose and can they reindustrialize? But for now, China has proven themselves the superior strategist. They are a positional player who has neutralized and can neutralize the advantages of their rivals very quietly. That's why I think China would smoke the USA if World War III went down today.